Is everybody set? All right. Hey, thank you very much for being here. I truly want to thank the presence of the media, because without question, the media is the community in a big part. So again, thank you all for being part of this discussion. I'm going to start this real quick. First off, with just acknowledging that without question, this is a tragic situation for everybody involved. It's tragic for the suspect. It's tragic for the suspect's family. It is tragic for the officer. It is tragic for the entire community. And that is one thing that, without question, that as we start this conversation, I want to make sure that everyone's aware that the Aurora Police Department is 100% committed to transparency. We're committed to getting all the information that we can get out, and we're making sure that we answer any questions for you and for the community as a whole. What you're going to see is I'm going to give a breakdown of an actual timeline of the incident, when it occurred, how it occurred, and when it occurred. This incident actually started on May the 12th, 2025. And I have a timeline here that we're going to go ahead and throw up here in a second, and I hope this gives you some help as far as understanding what occurred and when. I'm going to go through each of the events, and then again, you please identify points of interest to you, but without question, this event does not have one particular high point or low point. This event was something where a community member called on the Aurora Police Department to come in to respond and solve a situation that they could not solve. It continued to evolve, as the time frame will show, and the complexity of that continued to get much more dynamic as the officers arrived on scene. So what we had initially, that at 2:58, a call came out involving a trespass suspect. This trespass suspect was located up at the parking spot up in northern Aurora. The person reporting called and said that basically we had an individual who appeared to be under the influence of drugs. That didn't appear to have any injuries, and was basically walking around the location. Indicated that also the individual did not seem to be armed at the time. As time continued to unfold, right around 3:14 to 4:59, our reporting person called back again, and he stated that the male was walking around. He still seemed somewhat passive, but he was starting to come in and out of the location. He was starting to make requests. He was starting to make contact, starting to have a little bit more irritability in his behavior and how he acted. Right around 4:25, our person reporting called back and said that now this individual who was in this lot, and basically for everybody who doesn't know what the parking spot is, it is a location where people come and park their vehicles, and then they are transported to the Denver International Airport. So these vehicles are in this large lot, this parking spot, and our PR is actually the manager of that location. And so as the calls continued to come into communications, he then stated that now it appears that this individual is walking around and he's trying to open doors and do things, again, to the vehicles that were parked there. At 4:59, again, a few moments later, the PR calls back again, and he states that the male is now trying to fight them, and he is also trying to fight individuals in the parking spot themselves. So this call gets upgraded due to the threat, which is increased over a period of time. And at 5:18 p.m., our officers get dispatched to the location. And when I use the term officer, I mean one officer got dispatched. At 5:28, our officers go on scene. They make contact with the individual almost immediately. They see an individual that appears to be having some type of issues. He is in the parking lot area. He is walking pretty much aimlessly. He is not listening to verbal requests. He is not adhering to the officer's directions to try to determine out why he's there, who he's there with, is he there with anybody else, what's the situation, why exactly were the officers called. All of that started to get unfold as this went through. During that period of 5:28 to about 5:29, as you're going to see in the video here very quickly, you're going to see the officer go through a number of different things to try to deal with this suspect. And again, I think it's really important when you look at this to keep many things in your mind and many things in your thoughts. Our officer tried every aspect of de-escalation possible, and I'm going to detail each of those aspects on a one-by-one, case-by-case situation. But those involve de-escalation both in verbalization. They involve de-escalation with less lethal tools, which included a baton, a taser. Our officer was ultimately tackled, pushed down to the ground, where he had to try to control this individual who was extremely violent, while at the same time trying to control his own weapon, which you can tell from the video. It appears that the suspect is attempting to get a remove from our officer. So again, that is what took place in that very brief period of time. And actually one point, and again, you're going to see this in the video, and I'm very open about all of this video. At the conclusion of this event, the entire full-length video is going to be released so that not only the media can have it, but anybody can have it in our portal that basically demonstrates what occurred during this particular event. But as this event, as I mentioned, he went through all the de-escalation tools, all the de-escalation different aspects related to law enforcement intervention. At that period, the person who reported this incident, the manager of that parking spot, actually called and said that, hey, your officer definitely needs some help. And that is very, very complex when you think of an officer being at such a point where the community member has to call and make sure that communications and other officers are aware that an officer is basically being overtaken to the point of almost submission. So again, we're going to show that as well. And then at 5:30, after all these things have been exhausted, our officer ultimately ends up getting involved in an officer-involved shooting after the suspect continues his aggressive behavior and starts to charge towards our exhausted officer once again. So with that, if we could move forward, we're going to detail each of these different aspects and how they unfold. What you're going to see real quick on this video is the initial verbal contact with the suspect. So again, in a real quick recap, this call came out as a trespass. Our reporting person made several statements that this individual was walking in and around the parking spot. He seemed either under the influence or some type of issues going on. He attempted to get into the vehicles themselves. He attempted to fight with both patrons and also fight with the staff of the location. That was the issues and that was the information that our officer got as he responded. And this is the first contact with the suspect as he arrived on that location. So as you saw real quickly in that video, our officer, again, after receiving the information, and again, I really want to make this very, very clear. This was not an officer-initiated stop. This was a contact that was made on behalf of a community member who requested law enforcement's presence. And I think that's something really important to keep in mind because basically the situation got out of hand where that community member could handle the situation. And like so many other things, it then evolved into a situation where law enforcement got involved. And so I want to make that very, very clear. So our officer responds to that request for assistance, that request for service, which is exactly what our officers are sworn to do. So once he first arrives on scene, he makes contact with an individual, and as you can see from the video, very little contact, if any. He seemed very dislocated, almost very passive as far as what he was doing and how he was doing it. Our officers used basically de-escalation tactics in the form of verbalization to ensure that he understood that he was a police officer, to ensure that the individual knew that, hey, he is in the area, and just asking some very, very basic questions, which basically came to no results whatsoever. The next video you're going to see is where the suspect charges at our officer, who then subsequently uses a baton. And again, the reason I'm going piece by piece on this, I know this might be a long conference, but I really want to do this because, again, in law enforcement, we so often just throw terminology out, and we have the expectation that everybody at home, that the media, that everyone watching this has a clear understanding of what these tools are, what these actions are, but there's really no identifiers. There's no information about it. So what you're going to see here is an officer takes what's known as a collapsible baton. He feels threatened to the point to where that some type of intervention tool is needed. He removes this baton, he extends it out, and you're going to see two strikes that occur. If you could play that video, please. So what you saw in that video, and again, very important, is the officer, again, tried to make verbal contact with him, tried to relate that this was not a major issue. He was not going to be arrested at that point. It was merely just a discovery contact where he was trying to determine what exactly was occurring, what were the needs of the person who reported, and actually what were the needs of the suspect himself. Why was he in this behavior? Why was he walking in this parking lot? Why was he without his shoes? Why was he passive? Why was he not communicating? His response to that was he charged our officer. Our officer, like I mentioned, pulled out his baton. He used it 2 different times, which you could see. It had no impact on the suspect, and he continued to charge at our officer. The next video you're going to see is the deployment of what's known as the Taser. A Taser is the item that, again, it shoots out 2 darts. It then provides an electric current, which is meant to stop the actions or behavior of a suspect. And so our officer uses this tool. He fires 2 separate darts. There's 2 separate deployments. Both of these, unfortunately, were met with negative response as far as our suspect stopping his behavior. He actually increased his behavior. So what you saw there, again, you saw the officer, after the use of the baton failed, which is very incredibly troubling. He continued to take steps backwards. He was not moving towards the suspect in any way. He was trying to get distance between him and the suspect as this event unfolded. The suspect continued his behavior, moving towards our officer. Our officer utilized, again, what I mentioned was the Taser. 2 different Taser darts were deployed. Both of those Taser darts were not effective. They had no control or no controlling capacity over the suspect whatsoever. He continued to charge at our officers, and as you can see from the very last part of that video, the officer was pulled actually down and tackled down to the ground. The next part is where I wanted to show this real quick because, again, it does tell the story about what was occurring, what were the views of others other than just the officer themselves. So our reporting person, the person who originally called and said that this suspect was walking around the lot, was trying to get into vehicles, was trying to fight with both the patrons of that lot as well as the employees of that lot. After he sees what's unfolding out in the field, he makes another call to Aurora 911, and he starts to detail the troubles and the fact that our officer needs help. And so if we could play that video real quick, please.
So what's going on? The cop that you guys sent over to take care of gentlemen on my lot is in trouble. What do you mean, the cop's in trouble? The cop is in trouble. Yes, the cop is in trouble. Okay. What's happening with them? He came over here, talked to him, and then he like, yelling and screaming, he got tackled by the gentleman, and I think that you have to come look at. Okay.
So again, that call came not from an officer, that came from actually the reporting person at the parking spot to detail out the situation, the deadly situation at this point that our officer was involved with. What you're going to see now is the officer is overtaken by the suspect. He's actually pulled to the ground, and he starts to verbalize for help also. Help on the radio, help on trying to get additional units to the location, help to the individuals around that parking spot, trying to get them to intervene or help in any way they can. And throughout this process, what you're going to see is our officer struggling, trying to control the suspect through de-escalation verbally, telling him that he's still not in trouble, telling him that there are still other options. This in no way deters or stops the suspects. He continues his violent behavior. And our officer, at the same time of trying to do verbalization, you can see it, is also trying to maintain his equipment. As the very last portion of this, and again, if you look at it, you will see in the suspect's hand as he steps up, he is actually holding the magazine of the officers. That magazine could have just as easily been the handgun of the officer. The officer was trying to control all aspects of his equipment, one of those being his pistol. And while he was doing that, he was also fighting the aggressive suspect, and that suspect was able to start taking off equipment and start throwing it around the field while at the same time holding it.
Step it up. Hey man, help me!
So again, what you could see was our officer fighting without question for control of himself, fighting for control of his weapon, fighting for control of his equipment. As this continued to unfold, you heard the officer on the air, the statements that he made, step it up, step it up, step it up. That was to communications, trying to get additional units. During the duration of this, there was only one officer on scene. This event, like I said, on that timeline, it basically took place. He went code 6 on that call at right around, he went to the location at about 5:27. He ended up getting involved in the officer-involved shooting around 5:30, so although there was 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes, that was 3 or 4 minutes fighting by himself with no other additional officers in and around the event and no intervention on behalf of the people on the location. So as this was unfolding too, you could see that a magazine was taken from the officer's belt. The officer was trying to maintain his handgun, his weapon, and then there was also information again, and we're still, as the investigation continues to unfold, we're still trying to detail information related to the fact that the suspect was actually pulling the officer's vest up over his head where he had no visual control or no sights. And again, I think the big part of this too is the de-escalation component. He is still pleading with that individual to stop, to move away. He is definitely not the aggressor in this. That suspect is the aggressor, and he's saying you're still not in trouble over and over and over. And I think that is a really important aspect as we unfold this individual, try to understand what occurred, why it occurred, and how it occurred. The next thing you're going to see again is officers back up and then continue verbalization. We did not have officers respond to this incident until about 5:35. So it's like I said, the officer first went on this location at about 5:27. Officers did not arrive until 5:35. So after he was able to get up off of the ground with partial of his equipment removed, he continued to not move aggressively towards the suspect, but move back away from the suspect. Ultimately, that suspect did not continue to listen to verbalization to stop, to cease his actions, and he came at our officer once again where the OIS occurred.
Get on the ground now! Stop! Get back! I ain't gonna fucking shoot you, dude! Back up!
On this aspect here, I think it's really important to look at. You can see the shadowing of the fence. The officer is pressed back up against the fence. The fence behind him is also, it's a L-shaped configuration. And so there was nowhere else for this officer to go. He was pressed up against the location. He continued to try to get space in between the suspect and between himself. All of that again failed. Out of respect for the family and out of respect for viewers, again, at this point, this video stops. But as the suspect continued to move towards the officer, that's the point that the officer-involved shooting occurred. The suspect went down on the ground. He was at that location. He dropped where he was at, or a little bit further towards, closer near the officer. The help call went out, which had been going out for quite a bit before this. And then, like I said, at about 5:35, additional officers arrived to this officer's location. I also think it's important to put in there, again, how remote and how distant of a location where this event occurred at is that the first officers to arrive on scene were not Aurora PD officers. They were actually Denver police officers. And so, again, that tells the period of time that this officer was dealing with this entire situation on his own. With that, the video is going to come to a conclusion, but I want to make sure that we give you what is following and what is active and what's ongoing. As with all officer-involved shootings or major categorical use of forces, again, this is being handled both internally and externally. The actual review of the shooting itself is being done by an independent investigation of the Crisis Incident Response Team from the 17th Judicial District. That will involve a makeup of individuals from the District Attorney's Office, from other departments in and around the metropolitan area, detective personnel who will be part of the entire investigation and then present that investigation to the District Attorney before it gets to us. Another aspect that is occurring as well is also the Aurora Police Department independently is doing an internal investigation, and we will look at all administrative issues related to this entire incident and entire event. With that, I would like to open it up to any questions that anyone has. Sir?
With the, during the 911 call, the caller heard pops. Was that, can you say if that was a taser or was that gunfire?
Yeah, right now, that's still unfolding, but based on what it sounds like, that was most likely the gunfire. But again, you know, when I was out at that scene the day I gave a press release as well, I gave a quick conference, and I want to be as transparent and as open as I can, but this is still a continuing, ongoing investigations. There's nuances that I want to make sure get exposed through the CERT team and the 17th Judicial, and there's certain aspects that I think need that validity of time to be investigated completely. But based on what you saw, again, whether it was gunshots or taser, it was definitely in that period of time that was consistent. Yes, ma'am.
Was the officer following protocol when he approached the suspect alone?
Yeah, he was. I mean, that's unfortunately the way we have to make contact. In the city of Aurora, we drive in one-person police vehicles. Again, when you look at the size of Aurora, this is a major geographical venue that we cover. And we cover incredibly dense areas, and we also cover some incredibly remote areas, which is what you see up in the northern section. And so when that officer made contact, I really want to put that into perspective too, because, you know, you could always hindsight these things to death. It could be, you know, 20/20 vision is always going to be the aspect of it. But I wanted to also put into perspective of how many similar calls happen in the city of Aurora. How many trespassing calls happen in the city of Aurora? And so I pulled some statistics. Last year in 2024, the city of Aurora PD, we responded to 7,438 trespassing calls. Year to date, we have responded to 2,574 trespassing calls. And so I want to put that into perspective. So that is almost approximately about 10,000 trespassing calls, which came out very similar to this one. Obviously, they escalate and de-escalate based upon what occurs, but somebody has to make contact with these individuals, and very few of them end up like this. There are incidences, of course, that deteriorate, where the suspect decides to do behaviors or actions which ultimately result in use of force incidences. But if our officers treated every single incident like this that we get dispatched as a major high priority call, we would not be able to serve the rest of this population or the city of Aurora in any way. Unfortunately, these calls are way too redundant. And again, there's systematic reasons for that. I don't know what the story with this individual is. That's what we're still trying to determine. But again, you have to ask yourself, why is somebody out? Why is somebody who may need mental health issues, may have substance abuse issues, why aren't there systems in place other than law enforcement to address those issues? Why does it become, and why has it become so normalized that law enforcement is the de facto response to every situation that there is? It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's homelessness. It doesn't matter if it's someone experiencing major mental health crisis, if it's somebody experiencing major substance abuse issue. Again, there is no facilities right now that support, if that's what this is, that support those individuals, that support the families of those individuals. So what you have left is, unfortunately, is law enforcement becomes that de facto response to everything in society that society has failed to perform on effectively. So I hope that gives it a perspective.
Chief, can you kind of maybe help us understand why the officer would escalate to deadly force if he knew officers were on the way?
Well, again, I think, again, the video tells the story. The video tells a story of somebody who was pulled down to the ground, someone who is shrieking out as loud as he possibly can, trying to get some help, someone who is almost losing complete control of his equipment and has lost control of his equipment. Again, I think the important part is that the absence of a weapon does not mean that there's an absence of danger by any stretch of the imagination. And there's still a deadly threat. And that deadly threat continued to unfold in this event. And again, when you're looking at, I don't know how many people even in this room have been involved in a physical confrontation for 3 or 4 minutes. But those 3 or 4 minutes of being involved in that physical confrontation, I'm sure to that officer must have felt like 3 or 4 years. Any other questions?
You mentioned mental health. Do we know if it's a mental health issue, or has the toxicology report come back on the suspect?
No, that's still going to be an event, again, that the CERT team will be doing. The coroner will be doing the investigation on that. They will be providing all that information. Again, right now, that's the unknown. I really wish that I could, to you and to the community as a whole, say, hey, here's what we know, and here's why this individual did these actions. But that's the tragedy of these events, because so often you don't know, and we will never know, and the family won't know, and the community won't know. Why would somebody aggressively attack an officer? Why would somebody, for no reason, when an officer is saying, hey, all you got to do is just leave, you're not in trouble, why would that elevate to a point to where that individual is now tackling that officer, making that officer back up, making that officer utilize de-escalation tactics, all the tools that he used, verbalization, baton, physical force, tasers, everything that he could exploit, he exploited. And still the actions of that suspect did not stop. I can't give you a reason for that. I can't give you what was in that individual's mind. I don't know. But I know what came out of it. And it's a tragedy. But it's a tragedy also if that officer would have lost his life because he would have been disarmed, or if he was to such a point that he was incapacitated, that he could no longer fight, that he could no longer maintain his weapon, that he could no longer maintain himself. And so that is the balance when these officers are called on these situations. It wasn't just his response to that call to serve the community. It was his duty to do that. And that's what he did.
Chief, did you say that Denver police arrived on the scene first? And if you did, why didn't they do something in this case?
No, they came after the officer-involved shooting, and they actually came about 3 to 4 minutes afterwards. And that, again, demonstrates the incredibly extensive amount of time that it takes to get officers from one location to another based upon the geographic size of the city of Aurora.
Has the family seen the video?
Yep, they have, and that's why we're having this discussion now. The family has seen it. Again, there's certain protocols that we have to do in order to release the video to the community as a whole, and that's one of the steps we did. So last Friday afternoon or Friday morning, we met with the father. We showed him all of this video from beginning to end, and we made sure that he was aware of any information that he would want to provide or anything that he would like to talk about. And after that point, now we release it in this form for our press conference. And then ultimately what you're going to see this afternoon is that this entire video will be released to the entire community on our critical incident review, which again details many of the aspects that I'm detailing for you right now.
Will the actual shooting be shown and released?
It will,
Okay.
yes.
Can you say if drugs were found in his system yet?
And I cannot, no. We are not there yet.
Chief, can you talk to the timeline again? I don't remember the exact hours, but I feel like there was about an hour, hour and a half between the call that was made and when the officer actually responded. Can you kind of provide some insight on why that gap in time took place?
Yeah, I can, because again, Aurora is a major city, and there's a lot of activity that occurs in the city of Aurora, and unfortunately most of our officers that are working patrol, from the time they sit in their black and white vehicle, their queue or their computer is basically filled up with calls for service. Those calls for service are put in priorities based upon the necessity to get there, based upon the violence involved, based upon basically a harm index of what's occurring. When this call initially came in by our reporting person, it was a very low-grade call. It was just somebody who appeared to be aimlessly wandering in and around their location, was trespassing, was somewhat passive. As time continued and he started to call back more and more, it started to escalate. The suspect started to get violent. The suspect started to get irrational. The suspect started to get erratic. And that's when you saw the call elevate to a higher priority, which is at which time our officer was dispatched at a higher priority. And again, I go back to those numbers that I threw out. So in 2024, again, 7,438 very similar calls. In 25, it was 2,574. So almost 10,000 calls year to date in that 18-month period that these officers handle over and over and over again. And so when I talk about the failure of the system, when I talk about a lot of things that law enforcement is tasked with, that there should definitely be other societal systems that are dealing with this, this is a perfect example of that.
So from that timeline, from when Denver PD showed up, when did the next officer from Aurora show up?
Right, almost simultaneously.
I don't know if you debriefed your officer, I'm sure you had a conversation with him, but when he was debriefed, can you characterize, I'm gonna assume the level of surprise that none of this stuff worked until he had to finally resort to using deadly force? Can you summarize that conversation?
And again, that is a conversation that we do not have with that officer because it's done by the independent CERT team, and that is to keep the basically the sterile nature of the entire event. And so he was interviewed by this CERT team from the district attorney's office. We did not get involved in a debriefing. That is part of the end process There will be a debriefing. There'll be reintegration back into training, back into patrol and things like that. But right now, those conversations, those interviews, they're being handled by the CERT team independently from the Aurora Police Department.
Were there conversations with other officers on the scene, like after it was over? Like I'm sure he was describing on body cam what happened to him.
As a matter of fact, one scene that you're not going to see here is that when the Denver police officers arrive at about 5:35, the first thing he's telling them is the fact that, hey, I thought I was going to lose my gun. I was on, I was fighting for my weapon the whole time, and that's what you'll be able to see as you view the video yourself. Yes, ma'am.
One of the reporting persons mentioned that he was trying to open car doors. Has APD ever made contact with the suspect, or does he have a criminal history?
Yeah, that's something that we looked at, and right now it doesn't appear to be a very extensive history at all. So it really doesn't. It's a very strange, unique case. Yep.
Chief, and, I could be wrong in what I heard, but it looked like when he was first contacting the person, he said, "I'm gonna shoot you, man." Is that a de-escalation tactic that he should have used right off the bat? I mean, I'm not a law expert at all, just curious about that.
It was, because that, again, came after the baton. It came after the verbalization. It came to say, hey, you know what, maybe I can de-escalate this thing by demonstrating. I think what was really interesting, again, the verbalization component of it, to show the awareness of what was unfolding and what the possibilities were. And yet that had absolutely no deterrence on the suspect. That's when he charged at the officer again. That's when the officer used the taser twice. That's when, again, that failed, and that's when the officer was tackled again by the suspect and pulled down to the ground.
Hey, real quickly, on the call, it sounds like he said, on my lot. I know you said a community member. Was this a person working in that parking lot that day?
It was, yeah. It was an employee of the parking spot. Yes.
How often do you see a taser not work twice like that?
You know what? A lot of it is depend on the actions of the suspect. The taser, again, it's a proven tool. It's a tool that's proven to stop aggressive behavior, but it's like any other tool. They have different impacts based upon what a person that's being used on is experiencing. So if that person is in, a major substance situation, as far as abuse or overuse, or what type of substance they were taking, or if there's mental health issues connected with that, or if there's a combination of both substance abuse and mental health, again, all those less lethal tools are subjective. You could see a baton. Again, I don't think there's anybody in this room here who could handle getting hit a couple of times with a baton. It's not a pleasant experience in any stretch of the imagination. And yet, unfortunately, that did not work on this individual. He continued his aggressive behavior. Same as with the taser. Again, for most people, if you were tased here, you would be on the ground. That had no impact on that individual. He basically, it elevated his behavior as opposed to trying to de-escalate his behavior.
You have no indication that it was an equipment problem with the taser. It worked as designed?
That's going to be all reviewed. That's all part of the CERT team and the CERT investigation. But what we do know is that the darts did make contact, which is what they were supposed to do, to have that current conducted through the body. Yes, ma'am.
How long has the officer been on the force, and has he ever fired his weapon on duty?
Yeah, I don't think he's fired his weapon. He's been involved in an officer-involved shooting, and he's got about 4 years on the job.
The officer responded to this alone. Is this occurrence going to change how Aurora responds to these scenes in the future?
And again, that's something that we always look at. Again, as Aurora grows, as the things change, as crime rates change, as population growth changes. Again, an area that one time was probably empty is now packed with houses, packed with infrastructure to support the airport. That's something that we always look at. The challenge with us is obviously, like many police departments, is our staffing. We have to staff a very large geographic area that has an incredibly high number of calls for service. Again, I've mentioned this a couple of times. Last year, we were in the area of 257,000 calls for service, all different types of calls that our officers had to respond to. So it's really a balance to make sure that, one, we get those calls for service, but two, we also do it safely. And so a lot of times you'll see officers, there's single-person cars, they'll cover each other and do things based on proximity, based upon call load, all those things that we constantly look at and constantly review. Any other questions? Again, I truly and I sincerely mean this. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for getting this message out. This, without question, as I said at the very beginning, is a tragedy at all levels. There's so much to it that I don't think many of us, myself included, can understand why or how this individual felt that this was going to end in anything other than a negative situation. Like I said at the beginning, I feel for the father. I feel for the individual. I feel for our officer that he had to be put in that position. And I feel for the community member that had to call and basically depend on law enforcement to step in on a situation that he couldn't handle. And that happened. And our officers did that. They stepped forward when no one else would. And I want this department and I want this city to know that, again, we are completely transparent as far as what occurs and how it occurs. These independent investigations, again, I hope they bring clarity to the situation even more than what I'm talking about today. But our officers do not get paid to get injured. They don't get paid to get killed. They get paid to perform a task, to provide a duty, to provide an obligation to this community. And that's what this officer was doing. His obligation is to make sure that he goes home safely to his family. He did not dictate the actions of the suspect. He did not dictate his response to that location or that event. That was done by a call for service that the officers in the city of Aurora and the Aurora Police Department answer every single day. So thank you very much for your time.